Hi, Lee. Good to have you here today.
Thanks, Chris.
All right. So let's talk about some general cultural practices for our landscapes, right? So where would you like to start with that?
Okay, we're talking in the gardening situation.
We can talk gardening, right?
We want to make sure that we've got our seeds and everything laid out and preparing for the spring planting. Want to have our fertility right, having done a soil test at some point in the year, hopefully in the fall. Laying out our garden and what we're going to plant, selecting varieties that are disease resistant. You talked about things that are not necessarily using chemicals, but we can do a lot by selecting varieties in our garden that are disease resistant.
Yeah, that's good.
And making those choices on things. But having the soil ready to plant and tilled and those type of things is very important. To start our gardening experience.
Okay. Now we talked about getting the soil tested, right? You did mention that. There are some fertilizer recommendations, but you can also use organic materials as well. So can you talk about using some organic materials instead of using the commercial chemicals?
Sure. We can add organic matter to our gardening from either compost that we have done or compost that we buy from the stores. But adding that organic matter is very important to have good earthworm and good tillage and our soil that's not so compact. Right. It has better water holding capacity when we start our gardening procedure.
Okay. So when we're talking about, plants, right, or planting in our gardens, right, whether it's a vegetable garden, flower beds and things like that. So how important is plant spacing?
It's very important. We don't overcrowd our planting. So you need to know how big of a space do we need for whether it's a flower or whether it's a vegetable. How much space is that going to take? So make sure that you're getting good light, good air circulation around the plants, and that'll keep disease problems from developing in our garden.
Okay. So we're in a vegetable garden situation now, right? So we have our plants out there and they're starting to show signs of diseases. What is a good cultural way, to deal with those diseases?
You can remove those disease plants, like you've got one tomato plant that is dying. Remove that out of your garden as soon as you see it. You can remove leaves off that may be infected or, from specific plants that way. Okay.
And definitely with the tomatoes, blight is the first thing that pops into my mind. So you're just saying we can just remove those diseased leaves and and throw those away. Don't compost those, right?
Right, don't compost those.
You can throw those in the trash. So so how do we combat insect pressure, in the garden as well?
There again, the spacing and those type of things, having good air circulation will help, and using some of the organic neem oil and some of the other things, like you said, to control insects.
Yeah, and I would also always suggest scouting.
Yes.
Not just on the surface. Right. You have to flip the leaves over because a lot of those eggs, are going to be laid right up under the underside of that leaf. So definitely make sure you're out there scouting in your garden. So what about when we're trying to develop our lawn? So what are the things we should consider, for our lawn situation?
We want to make sure that we've gotten it cleaned up if we're starting sticks or leaves or those type things off our lawn. Fertility proper than that. And cutting height is very important in grass in our lawns, and make sure that we're not mowing too low or cutting more than a third of the foliage off of it each time that we're cutting our lawn, and that way.
Okay. And two, I'm thinking about the lawn situation and flower beds, for that matter. We always get the question about controlling weeds. And of course, most people would consider using chemicals to control weeds, but are there other means to control the weeds outside of using chemicals?
In our lawn areas?
In our lawn or flower beds.
Or flower beds, I mean, you can mulch will keep the weeds from coming up and seed germination, that type of thing. Okay. Of course, hand pulling is always one of those things that we don't like to do, but sometimes that's an easy way. If you just see one weed come up in your area, then pull it up. Don't go get the chemical and start spraying for 2 weeds in your flower beds and those type things.
Okay. And if we do have diseased limbs and things like that, how important is pruning?
Pruning is very important. Remove those diseases off our ornamentals and getting those out of our garden area. So when our shrubs and trees start to come out in the springtime, we'll start seeing there's some disease problems, and you want to remove those as soon as you see it.
Right. Which is why it's always important to scout,
Right.
So, I would recommend, to scout, especially in the wintertime, because you can see the bones of your landscape, per se. And it's a good opportunity to look for those scales and things like that. So just in case you have to use low impact means to control, insects and things like that, there are some that are out there that you can use. And I know we both talk about using the oils, right? So can you talk a little bit about using those low impact means to control insect pests?
Yeah, we can always use a horticultural oil, and sometimes you may just see 1 or 2 insects.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that you need to go spray immediately.
Right. That's a good point.
Kind of scout and just see if there's an increase. And sometimes we can use a water hose and just force the insects off the leaves, and that may stop the problem right there.
Right, right. Yeah, so I'm big about using the oils, whether it be dormant oil, horticultural oil, neem oil, something else, and of course insecticide or soap. You always want to read and follow the label, of course, when you're doing that, because we want to look out for our pollinators.
That's correct.
For that means. So is there anything else that you can think of we need to do in the garden that we consider to be a cultural practices? And I'm glad you mentioned using the resistant varieties, because that's something I try to push as well. So I thought that was good. But is there anything else we need to be mindful of?
Just scouting the time that you're actually working in the garden. If it's high humidity or heavy dews, we don't want to be out there pruning tomatoes or anything that you might be spreading a disease from one cutting of one plant from another plant when the high humidity and dew on the foliage that way.
Okay. Yeah, I got one last question for you. So when we talk about vegetable gardens, right, how important is crop rotation? Because that's what I consider to be, a cultural practice.
Yeah, that's one of the more important things in the gardening. If you're doing a gardening,
right,
we definitely want to rotate our vegetables and tomatoes. Don't plant them in the same area. Yeah. We always have problem with early blight and those type things. And rotation will definitely help that. So you don't want to plant the same vegetable in the same spot every year. Rotate your garden around.
Okay, and why is that? Why don't we do not want to plant in the same place every time because of
diseases and other problems that's in the soil borne potentially there.
Right.
That.
Okay. Well, thank you, Lee. We appreciate that. So hopefully with those good cultural practices, we get those gardeners ready, for spring and the rest of the year. So thank you much. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. To find out more information on this topic, just click on the familyplotgarden.com link in the description.